Perfect. And I'm really glad today to be introducing and bringing Richard and Erica to the municipal network. Quest and Pollution Probe have been working together on the Community Energy Plan Alignment Framework. And what we all care about is what they are going to be talking about. What are the key ingredients for success, not on developing community energy plans, but actually on implementing said community energy plans, which we know is going to be is a hell of an endeavor and something that we're all struggling to figure out what role we can all play in helping to advance that effort towards it. I did want to do a little bit of the first Indigenous land acknowledgements. Really happy to be joining you from the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, and Ojibwe peoples and the Mississaugas of the Credit in Southern Ontario. And I'm calling in from Hamilton on that. I normally like to do a little bit of a learnings as part of every land acknowledgements I do. I try and kind of add in a kind of learning that I have to attach to that land acknowledgements. I will admit to today that I didn't actually have time to do that research. So the next webinar, I'm actually going to have to do it twice because that's got to fulfill the promise I made, is that it's going to be like every land acknowledgements I say has to be followed up by research and a learning and a sharing with others. The problem is I didn't get to it today. So now I've got two things to add on my to-do list, which will be at the next webinar. But I want to thank everyone for being so patient and tolerant with those sharings, because it really does. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I was sorry I wasn't able to get to it today, but it is something that will be in future webinars and future sharings. And then on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Richard from Pollution Probe and Erica from Quest to speak to the Community Energy and Emissions Plans Alignment Framework. Take it away, Erica and Richard.
Thank you so much, Gabby, and thank you all for coming this afternoon. I hope your day is going great. I'm Erica Wicks, Managing Director at Quest, and I'm located in Montreal, so very close to Ontario, and excited to be here to talk to you today about this. I do just want to warn everybody that my internet is kind of choppy, so I wanted to say this initial hello. Now I'm going to turn my video off just so I don't cause things to freeze. Okay, great. So this is a joint project between Quest Canada and Pollution Probe. And for those of us, or those of you who don't know us, Quest is a national nonprofit that supports communities on their way to net zero. And we do this in a variety of ways. We do a lot of applied research, engagement with energy and use stakeholders, and advocacy to help create the enabling conditions to help communities get to net zero. Pollution Probe is a national non-for-profit charitable organization that we partner with a lot, and their mandate is improving the health and well-being of Canadians by advancing policy that achieves positive, tangible environmental change. We'd really like to thank the ISO. I'm not sure if there's anybody from the ISO on the call today, but this project was supported through their Grid Innovation Fund. So thank you so much for supporting this project. And we'd also like to thank the City of Burlington, and especially Lynn Robichaud, who was invaluable in the participation of this project and helping develop the framework. So after that, we're going to dive into the framework now. So why do we need this implementation framework? You know, Gabby had alluded to a few things right off the bat there, but as you likely all know, more and more Ontario cities are developing community energy plans or climate action plans, and throughout the remainder of this meeting, we'll just call them CEPs. But know that that's a catch-all term for other type of plans. But we're not not seeing a lot of progress or as much as we'd like to see on the actual implementation of these plans. And while local governments are often drivers in the development of CEPs, they can't implement them all on their own because local governments have direct control over only a small portion of emissions in their communities. Really, a lot of different stakeholders need to be brought in to help with implementation. And also, municipalities don't often have the funds or expertise on board to implement these plans on their own. So this requires working with a wide range of stakeholders, both inside and outside the energy sector, to achieve goals that have hopefully been developed kind of like an aligned or common fashion with some of these stakeholders. In terms of this framework, what we're trying to do with this project is to develop a replicable approach that enables communities in Ontario to achieve the objectives of their CEPs by aligning their plans, strategies, and objectives with those of the energy sector and other key stakeholders, so that everybody can work collaboratively towards implementation all the way through to the end of the plan and then new plans that end up coming out of this. So our framework assumes that the community energy plan has already been developed, but the elements we'll overview could be integrated into the development of a CEP as well if you don't already have one. Our framework goes through a clear and logical process whereby key municipal, energy, and other stakeholders are identified and convened so that they can collaborate to develop this aligned framework. And that will facilitate the systematic and effective implementation of a community energy plan. And before we get into the overview of the framework itself, always important to speak about the methodology a little bit. So what we did to develop the framework was by first reviewing recently developed community energy plans or climate action plans, as well as conducting structured interviews with municipal staff across Ontario. So a lot of you in this group are likely part of that, and I thank you for that. We then used Burlington as a case study to test and develop the actual framework that you'll see today. And we first started by interviewing key stakeholders within Burlington to find out how they wanted to be engaged and what would help them move forward. We then held a hands-on workshop with stakeholders in Burlington using a draft version of the framework. And then following the workshop, we finalized it. So now I'm going to turn it over to Richard.
Hi, thank you very much, Erica. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the framework that we have developed. You can get the framework on our website, on both our websites, if you are interested. And this will be saved so you can look into more details later on. This is the issue the alignment framework aims to address: how to engage all the sectors and stakeholders of the community supporting or contributing to the CEP. Based on our work, we've developed an alignment framework that will help drive effective stakeholder alignment. And this will help to lead to the collaboration necessary to achieve these ambitious plans. But one thing that's important is that this framework is not a one-time activity. It's an evolving situation. The communities are always evolving, and whatever we do here needs to be continuously updated and renewed. You can get a copy of, as I mentioned, you can get a copy of the framework on both of our websites. The first stage, naturally, before we start looking into who the stakeholders are, is we need to identify what are the goals, what are the elements of the community energy plan that is done. And this is done at multiple levels. You first need to look at what are the macro goals, what are the broad outcomes of the CEP, of the CAP that the community is trying to achieve. What are the objectives and what are the targets that the implementation is trying to get to. Once you identify the macro goals, you need to dive into the sectoral goals. What are each individual sector? What are the strategies for each sector? And what are the actions to achieve those strategies? And then, of course, you need to look at the parameters of action. What are the outcomes? What's the timelines of these different sectoral strategies? And all these should kind of work upwards so that the macro goals are all achieved by being achieved through these sectoral strategies. Just to give you an idea of the worksheet we have done, we have an example community that you can download from our website. It's called Any City Ontario. And we put in as some examples that you can read. So this worksheet is available on our website, and the example is also available on our website. So you can take a look at them just to kind of give you an idea of how to do it. And you can start doing your own community later on as well. And this is an example of where we look into the different sectors, the subsectors, what are the objectives, and what are the targets. This will help you identify who are the key stakeholders in order to help you identify these targets. I'm going to be showing screenshots of some of the worksheet throughout this presentation, just to give you an idea of what doing this framework actually means as we're going through. Once we identify once we identify what are the priorities, identify the elements, it's important to identify what are the priorities. CEPs are transformative in the scope and the scale of the challenge they lay out, and they do affect all areas of the community. But most communities are limited in what they can do at any one time. So it's important to identify what should be done now, what can be done later, what is the priority for today, what is the priority for tomorrow, and down the road. Identifying these priorities, there's a number of different ways to identify different priorities, and a lot of these are going to be internal to the community. So what are the interests in the community? Is there an economic development argument? Is there a champion in the community that really wants to work on a certain priority? Is there a lot of interest from some of the stakeholders in pursuing one particular priority of the CEP? And these are some of the priority criteria that can be used. Other criteria can be used to identify what are the priorities. And one of the main priorities could be just, is there interest in different levels of government and funding? And that could be an important area. And again, to show you how this works in practice, the worksheet will allow objectives to be assessed on the basis of the selected criteria. And the outcomes here don't have to be determinative. So even if something is in the worksheet comes out as a high priority, if there is particular interest in something else in the community, well, you can of course work on this. This is just be indicative of what could be the priorities. And by doing this democratically, by doing this together, it can help increase buy-in because people can work and decide what are the reasons for prioritizing one action over another action. What is the reasons for prioritizing electric vehicles over a solar co-op, or active transit over public transit? And this will help you identify some of those priorities in order to get in some of the buy-in and identify some of the priorities. Stakeholder alignment is, of course, the meat, or if you prefer, the tofu of this framework. And it's the largest module that we have. This module is actually broken down into 3 different sub-modules. First, there's the stakeholder identification, making sure the right people are at the table. Then there's the stakeholder mapping. This is like who is willing or able to advance the CEP. And then stakeholder roles. What are the different roles for some of the different stakeholders we're going through? Once we've identified the stakeholders, this is very important. So we're going to go through each of these sub-modules very quickly. The stakeholder identification, of course, virtually all sectors and stakeholders of the community have a role to play in CEP. CEPs are truly transformative, but some stakeholders are going to be more important than others. Some are going to be more relevant to different projects. So one of the first elements of it is to identify the different stakeholders. And some of the stakeholders could be other levels of government. They could be funders. They could be stakeholders such as the ISO or Enbridge. They could be civic institutions such as a school board or universities or other public tertiary education facilities, as well as energy service provider. Developers are one that tends to be lost, people tend not to think about, or those providing rental accommodations or business office buildings such as the Brookfield, for example, can be a large stakeholder as well. And to give you an idea, this framework worksheet can help you with this exercise. So this exercise is best taken collectively, so people can brainstorm what are all the different stakeholders and what are their sectors? What are the areas that they are most applicable to that sector? And again, this is from the example that we have developed for any city, Ontario. The next, of course, not all stakeholders are equally interested in the CEP, and some stakeholders are going to have a larger impact, and some just may not have the amount of time in order to participate. So once all the stakeholders have identified, the next step will be to examine why they want to engage, what are their drivers, and what is their potential contribution. For example, this is again an example from the worksheet, is to identify why people want to do it. We look, for example, any city hydro, which would be the local distribution companies. In some cases, maybe there's a regulatory obligation, or maybe it is because the city is pursuing them, maybe business development. And that could list into what is their interest? Do they have a high interest, medium, or low interest? And what's their contribution? What could they provide to the implementation of the CEP as well? And once this is done, these stakeholders can be mapped. So this could be, I'm sure you've seen such mapping before, where it's a 4-quadrant element where you can decide where do different stakeholders fit. Do we just keep them informed, or do we keep them closely engaged, or is it some mixture of the need? Do we only bring them in when their topic is discussed, such as maybe developers or people who own rental buildings? Or do they want to keep them engaged all the time, like you may want to do with the LDC and Enbridge Gas, for example, if they're in your community? The next is looking at what are the roles of the stakeholders. There's a number of different roles that stakeholders have to have in order to effectively in order to contribute to the CEP. And municipalities can't fill all the roles. That would be impossible. So we have to look at how the different stakeholders can play different roles. And we have identified 7 different roles that could be played by different stakeholders. And this would affect how they interact with the CEP and what their relationship is with in the implementation of it. Of course, governance, some stakeholder will have a governance role. They have decision-making authority and is accountable. This could be the city, it could be the LDC, it could be Enbridge Gas, for example. There could be many different groups that are on the governance role. And we all know how important champions are, that the people in the community who are supporting a lot of this, and you can help change the behavior of the community, or also influence decision makers in order to ensure that this process keeps on going. And there are also rethinkers, those who help develop new strategies. Those could be sometimes the city staff, it could be developers, it could be private sector, it could be public sector, it could be higher education as well. Some of the other roles would be reducers. It's important to know that identifying large consumers is also a very important part, and sometimes these are overlooked in many community energy plans. And sometimes what their role and their responsibilities can sometimes be outside of municipal control. But by bringing them in and having them part, they can align a lot of their interests in terms of what their corporate commitments are to reduce energy use, how that can be aligned to the community needs as well. And of course, there are the enablers who are responsible for the policies. This could be the ISO, could be the city, and the allies, those who again will publicly support the plan in order to make it, in order to help to drive a successful implementation, and to ensure that there is continued support for the CEP at the various levels of government and on the council. To give you an idea, we have, again, there's an example, the framework worksheet actually will highlight what we think could be the role for different stakeholders based on the information that is provided. But you would have to go through and actually identify which may not be inappropriate. That person may not be appropriate for some different roles. And again, this is an example of the inner city Ontario example. And this is looking at what could be some of the potential roles for some of the different players in that community. And assigning these roles, again, can help determine how to involve the stakeholders. And there's some information here. This is adapted from the International Association for Public Participation. And this is how the different public participation metrics can be used, and how we can decide how to involve the different stakeholders based on their roles. And once we get to the implementation of the plan, action needs to be taken at the sectoral level. So each of the different sectors, whether or not be building, industry, transportation, each sector needs a sectoral level strategy. Some sectoral strategies will target large consumers, which could be, for example, the public transit infrastructure. And for every sector in which there's a best practice, a well-supported program to roll out, there's another where you're going to need to develop customized programs in order to achieve the CEP. And in many cases, when you're looking at the sectoral strategies, it's important to also bring in some of the city stakeholders. This could be transit, development, elected officials, committee members, planning. One of the large could be those even who are issuing bylaw enforcement, or those who are approving new developments, in order to bring them into the different sectoral strategies so that they can bring their own networks in, as well as contribute to helping think through what are the different ways in order to implement the CEP. And once this diagram illustrates here, lays out a conceptual framework for working with stakeholders and to develop a new strategy. And it looks complicated, but if these strategies were easy to develop, well, we'd already have them, and this framework we wouldn't be needing, this kind of process would be needing, and this framework would be needing. So it is somewhat confusing, but if you work through the framework, this will organically develop as you're going through. And of course, someone needs to run the ongoing implementation of the plan. Someone needs to drive the implementation. Someone needs to continue to coordinate the stakeholders and the institution. What we've seen is that traditionally, this is done by the municipality. And in most places, in a lot of communities in Ontario, it's the municipality that is driving this plan. But this is not always the case. This module, the framework, is driven by what is the function. And the function is to drive implementation and the coordinations of the stakeholders and the institutions. So there are many ways that different players could play a role in the different coordination, or there could be a different coordinating body. You want to look at the framework provides a process along with 14 criteria in order to help communities assess the relative merits of different options. It could be, for example, instead the community could be an NGO or a government organized NGO. And there are a couple of communities in Ontario that are looking at developing NGOs in order to drive the community energy plans, just because they believe that the independence that an NGO has would allow for greater implementation and allow them to play a larger role than city staff would be, because they could be constrained by the bureaucracy as well. But at the same time, the city staff have the resources. They have the staff, there's the administrative support, they have the institutional culture, they can just talk to people inside the city. So these things need to be weighed up. So we have a framework, we have a module looking at how do you prioritize the different criteria in order to identify who should be the coordinator. And of course, this all requires continuous improvement. The circumstances in the communities are always changing, as I'm sure everyone here knows very, very well. And there are always new opportunities. Sometimes new governments will come in and they'll have funding opportunities for a new project. New players will enter the sector. Maybe there'll be a new industry that develops in the sector, maybe a new industry that comes to the community. Maybe an industry will leave the community and another one will come in. And this will all affect the implementation of the community energy plan. So it's important to regularly revisit and update the activities in the framework. And this can be done annually or every 2 years, depends on the nature of the community. And if you recall back to the initial screen we had where we have the circle, and that's why there needs to be a constant reevaluation with the members of the community and the implementation group to make sure that the right stakeholders and all the relevant stakeholders are there. And as things have changed, to make sure that the stakeholders would be aligned in there. So that is a very much a whirlwind overview of the framework. Like I said, it's available on our website, so you can go there and download it now, including the worksheet and the example community. So we encourage you to do that, and you can contact us for any questions or any support you may need. We're happy to talk to you with help. Here's the URL where you can download it, and I see that Gabby has also put the URL for the framework in the chat, so feel free to use that as well. We have a few questions here as we move on to, we really would also like to hear from you. So how does this address a need for you? Do you feel this would be useful for you? And what else would you like to see? Do you think there's anything we've missed? We've talked to a lot of the communities across Ontario, and we tried to make this as exhaustive but user potentially useful at the same time, which is kind of a tough, difficult balance sometimes. But if there's anything else that you think we've missed, please, we'd like to hear from you, and would you be interested, as well as just general questions you may have on the framework. Thank you. Gabby?
Great. Thanks so much, Richard. Thanks, Erica. Thanks for all the hard work on pulling this all together and all the kind of leading practices and the leading practices on building that stakeholder team that is so critical to enabling implementation to occur. So I've put in a couple of questions. I put in some of the questions just into the chat as well, but thanks, it's all up there on the screen. So we would love to get some insights from folks on terms of how does this address the need that you're having? How useful do you think it will be for you? Or how do you think you can bring it into either the community energy plan that you've already developed and got council approved, or the one that you're in that's in development for your municipality, if that's the stage you're at? And I will leave it to any kind of, you can just unmute, ask your question, raise your hand. You can throw it in the chat. A number of different things you can do. Thank you, Erica.
My pleasure.
Thanks. Any questions for Erica and Richard? I'll throw one in there, and it's not gonna. It's gonna be a little bit of it. Oh, sorry. I need to stop. Lisa's got a hand up. Lisa, take it away.
Thanks, Gabby. Thanks, Richard. This is really interesting. Really appreciate your work on this. Just as a member of a CEP in the past, I was on the Town of Oakville CEP in a couple different roles. Just wondering, how did you quantify or qualify successful CEPs and how they've evolved?
But this was really looking at, I imagine Erica made up some comments on this as well. This project was really looking at how we implement them. So it was taking what has been done by the community and looking at how do we drive the implementation of it. Because there has been a lot of changes, as you know, in different CEPs. And they're called climate action plans generally, even though they are very much similar to what the CEPs were. But we're really looking into what are the different elements of how can we drive the success of these ones to make sure they're successful. Erica, do you have any comments on that? Can you add?
Yeah, I can talk about this a little bit more. And saying my internet is unstable, so I apologize if it is choppy here. But yeah, firstly, every community is different, and there are going to be different success indicators based on size. As you all, the project a few years ago, Quest and Pollution Probe, the Smart Energy Communities benchmark, and I'll put the link to that in the drive. But I think for a community, there are a lot of different indicators you can look at as you assess this over time, apart from the standard indicators you want to look at to reduce GHG emissions or meet certain economic objectives to like as you're implementing the CEP. So one non-standard, I guess, indicators that you can look at for success is kind of like collaboration, right? As Richard said, so how many new connections have been made and how how have staff either at the local government or at partnering organizations changed in terms of roles and responsibilities to focus on implementation here, because it does need the resources put towards it to get done. So that is the staff, that is governance structures, and that is kind of like financials that are allocated towards going to implementation of the plan, so that you can see in different kind of ways that it gives indicators that it'll be implemented over the long term. Here, you know, we are talking about planning alignment. So continually assessing the alignment of the strategies that different organizations have, and having a mechanism to do that is also really important. So those are a bit different from, you know, the more standard indicators, energy intensity per square foot for your buildings, etc. But those are some examples.
Great, thank you. I know that when municipalities have asked us on the, you know, like what makes for a good climate action plan or a good community energy plan, I know I have been a little bit facetious sometimes and said, one that's implemented.
Yeah.
And it's all fine and good to say that, but we know that there are significant challenges associated with implementing the community energy and climate action plans.
Mm-hmm.
We also know that there's an energy system in place that's geared towards maintaining the status quo. And I think that some of the kind of conversations about the importance of the stakeholder groups to implement, we can get programs in market, like let's just say, for example, we can advance green development standards that bring an energy mix, an energy matrix to decision making. Municipalities can advance retrofit programs, but they are also very, very dependent on the decisions made at the provincial level, which they don't have direct control over. And that's where I think that kind of stakeholder engagement is so critical, because it does raise the systems changes that need to happen to give these plans the implementation potential that they can and need to have to achieve GHG reduction targets.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Gabby. I'm doing another project working with municipalities on the Enbridge's natural gas DSM plan. That should be forthcoming any week now, apparently, after many delays. And there's been a lot of pushback. What we have seen is actually getting the communities involved, getting the players, submitting their comments to regulatory authorities, having people in support of different groups really can make a difference when you go before the Ontario Energy Board or when you're trying to influence government. Having support in a lot of these things really does help. It sounds a bit, why they don't really care too much about the community groups, but they really do. And if you can get the more you can get, that you can actually start influencing some of these larger decisions by having people on board.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw that, earlier this year. I know this city of Ottawa obviously has quite a bit of pull because of location and size, but challenging the final phase of Enbridge's gas pipeline, right? So, I mean, this is partly because of the CEP, Energy Evolution, the OEB was influenced by that, right? And that went against the Made in Ontario environmental plan. So it's a really recent example of how communities are starting to kind of reclaim or claim some of this power and influencing decisions as well. And if you're a smaller community, banding together with neighboring communities to perform advocacy, I think is really important.
Thank you. Mike, take it away.
Sure, my connection's a bit spotty too, so hopefully I can come through okay without video. Thanks for the presentation. I think there's a couple of kind of takeaways from the theme that resonate with me. One is the convener and kind of I use the term project manager kind of role. Making sure things come together, and when you look even at the work across ministries at the province of Ontario, they don't do the work all themselves. They are conveners, they put plans together, even outside of government regulatory authority. That's the stuff. They publish reports, provide funding, all sorts of stuff, right? Similar with municipality, if the onus is on their shoulders alone to achieve those goals, then there's something wrong. It means the partners aren't good or aren't, working together. So, it's really to, get the partners to step up as well, right? They come in and say, here, this is our objectives and our goals, and here's what we can do. And then you add that all up, see what it can move in the plan and where the gaps are, and you do a gap analysis and mitigate those gaps, right? So kind of normal project management stuff, right? And bringing all those parts together in a way that's common is a good role for the municipality, because often there's a lot of funding, regulatory requirements. Some of the other examples that have been brought up, sometimes they're like ships passing in the night, right? They're done in silos or not in proper partnership, and they don't get the results that they're intended to. So really the community energy and municipal role for municipal energy plans, community energy plans, is to kind of be that glue then that at least provides that forum to help, because they're the only players that consider every form of energy, every consumer in that municipality, and a lot of other things too. So I think, those really jumped out to me. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Can you see? Oh, sorry, did I?
I just wanted to kind of add, I think those are some great points, Mike, and I think it's one of the things we found when we were piloting this in Burlington, was that once we started mapping out all the stakeholders and identifying the stakeholders, that we kind of realized that there were a lot of people weren't talking to. So it's a lot of it was like, oh, well, no wonder this isn't working. We haven't talked to, we're not talking to anyone in this sector. And so that became kind of, well, we need to extend our contacts. People kind of get used to talking to the same people. And they don't realize necessarily until they kind of map things out. There's certain people you're just not talking to.
It's interesting, the same sort of thing would happen, I'd say, and this, like, in terms of our usual suspects that are part of our advisory committees as we develop either climate action plans or community energy plans, is just how you want to kind of look at the unusual suspect, the strange bedfellows who you would normally not have engaged with, but then even just having that conversation with them, just to let them know what you're doing. I kind of align it along the lines of provincial engagement. You know that you're up for a struggle in terms of getting, let's say, for example, at present, getting our provincial government to focus on climate and energy, putting a climate lens to our energy decisions is something that we all want to really achieve. We know it's going to be a challenge to do that, but we know that it is absolutely critical. But it does fall to us to push them in that direction. And if we don't do that effort to engage with them to make that a reality, then shame on us. But if we engage with them and they don't do it, then shame on them. And that's like, to me, that's what really comes down to it. We all have our individual responsibilities. Everybody's got different decision-making authorities, and that's just the reality of the situation. And not everybody is going to care as much about the climate implementation as we do, but we have to reach out to them and we have to talk to them, and we have to better understand, use every engagement opportunity as a mechanism to try and understand what might be that foot in the door. Where might there be alignment between what they care about and what we care about? And I wanted to raise something just with Anne. She was wondering about just what's the difference between a community energy plan and a climate action plan. Just wanted to kind of highlight, as Erica was mentioning, they're exactly the same. I've never seen an energy plan that didn't bring in emissions into its overall scope. I've never seen an action plan that didn't bring energy into that scope. It really just comes to a different name, but the plan is exactly they're the same. And I would never encourage a municipality to do a climate action plan and a community energy plan separately. Though those two are really two peas in a pod that need to be together. And it's important to kind of highlight the energy implications as well as the emissions implications. Are there any other questions from the group? No? All right, I'm going to just run a poll, just going to launch that. Just want to get some insights from you in terms of how useful you found the webinar. Again, we always wanted to like very useful, somewhat useful, not really useful. Really, we also want to kind of recognize it's, you know, in terms of learning opportunities, but also if you're still struggling to figure out how you apply this in your job responsibilities, that's something also that we really want to know, because we want to try and figure out how can we do a better job of helping you figure out where the application of this information is able to be advanced. Excellent. And I want to thank Richard and Erica. Thanks so much for helping with kind of, again, I really liked the examples of actually trying to identify who's your most likely candidates for supporting implementation. Because in some ways, you don't have to get everyone on board, but if you can find your top 3 to 5 leaders and then get implementation happening in whatever sphere they are willing and able to contribute to the implementation goals, then you show those success stories. And then that way you build that story and momentum moving forward. Because we just, you know, it's like we in the night kind of example, like we just got to do it, because that motivates us to ensure that we can see action taking place, and that will motivate further engagement and further action. So you don't have to get everyone on board. You don't even have the time and resources to get everyone on board, but reach out to as many people as you can and find those candidates who are most likely to lead to implementation, and then put your resources to helping them make the changes that you know that they need to make.
Yeah, and start looking for some quick wins, some long-term plays, start planning it all out. It's a very detailed framework, so I encourage anyone who's interested to go to our websites and check it out. And feel free, if you have any questions or concerns, to contact us. It is available for everybody, so it's free on our website. You can go down and play with it as much as you want.
Great. And I'll just a reminder, I will be sending out the URLs for where it can be accessed. I will also be sending out the PDF of the presentation along with the recording. Please do share them with others in your municipality that you think will be interested in this or should be interested in this. And if there's any final remarks that either Richard or Erica would like to make, please feel free.
I'd just like to thank everyone again. Erica, do you have anything you want to say? You're on mute, Emily.
Thank you. Oh my goodness, we still have to say that. Yeah, no, just thanks everybody again for coming today. We appreciate it. Cheers.
Thanks so much, Richard and Erica, for taking the time to share the framework and give an overview of it to the municipal audience. Really appreciate that. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.
You.